Hello duelists, this is Tom Boggs here, and in this video we're going to be doing the top tier timeline of 2016. So previously I have done a top tier timeline, half of it's on Galactic Gods channel and the other half is on my channel. From the beginning to 2009 I believe is on Galactic Gods channel, and the rest of it to 2015 is on this channel of course, and we're going to add more onto that list. This list is partially sequential to the most part because other decks did regain support and I kind of don't want to cover the same things over and over again, so I'll kind of mash it up a little, so the timeline might be a little mucked up there, but it's okay. You guys kind of get the idea. So starting off with the backtracking of 2015, let's recap a little. So what decks died back then? Well, we have Shaddolls and Necrons that died back in the previous ban list because, well, Shaddolls lost Construct and Necrons lost Strut. So with Strut gone, they lost their signature combo piece, the one piece that searched stuff, and acted as the full tribute fodder, and well, Shaddolls lost their main boss monster, Construct. Without Construct, they are very limited on their plays, and the fusions, there's no equivalent to Construct basically. But what did survive? Let's start off with some of the structure deck. We have Masters of Pendulum. We have the Pendulum Magicians. Pendulum Magicians gave us the generic scale 8, which of Dragon Pit Magician, and give us a lot of consistency too, with like Pendulum Call giving you the double search, basically filling up your skills really quickly, Wisdom Eye filling up your extra deck very quickly, and this made it viable to play level 7 monsters that normally were not playable back in the day, like Mist Valley, Apex Avian for instance. That card shot up in price like crazy because it had the ability to negate stuff like CDI just by returning itself or any wind monster, Mist Valley monster, back to the hand. And this could also interrupt any effect, so it could be like a Moon Mirror Shield activating and they can negate that, destroy it, bounce itself back to hand, keep going off, and then paired with a lot of other monsters like Majespecter Kirin and Mechanical Hound, but you basically had one of the best decks to shut down your opponent. So this is basically one of the eras where making unbreakable boards was one of the key plays, and this deck would eventually evolve much further. Next up, we have the first wave of Majespecters coming back from 2015. This is one of the survivors as well. Majespecters definitely gained a lot of momentum. They were the first deck that had an overall protection of destruction and targeting for all their monsters. So that was a generic trait that they had and they shared. But the most popular monsters for this deck during this time of the year was only Bunbuku and the Fox, and we don't have the Toad yet, so we'll get into more of that stuff later, and Kirin. These are the main monsters, and they were splashed into Perform Age decks, and this is when Perform Age, I guess they weren't at their strongest at the time, but they were not bad. Combined with like Trick Clown, Damage Jugglers, all that good stuff, this is the deck to go to. And what happened was Ignister and Luster wasn't exactly very popular at the time. That's why they were so cheap in the beginning, and then they eventually spiked up like crazy. We know why they spiked up, and we'll get to that in a bit. The one deck that did live for, I would say, the longest in 2016, I guess a bit short of BA, but Kozmos. Kozmos was definitely one of the decks that were super strong. Probably because they had some of the most broken ships. They weren't broken, they were not exactly fair either, but they are very strong ships because they had one of the strongest recurring play, like from Kozmo Town, retrieving most of your banished stuff, so banishing was not an option. And during then, they played the Farm Girl OTK. Well, if they get one Farm Girl off and they hit you, you're basically dead. With triple Dark Destroyer, that was very hard to play against, and Dark Destroyer was immune to targeting, and any kind of destruction-based effect would trigger its effect to summon out a lower level ship or pilot, so that kind of made them very hard to deal with. But Bosch changed all that, so this is the era of January when Bosch came out. They gained two really powerful things. They gained Tin Can, and they also gained Cosmojo. Now, Cosmojo and Tin Can were regarded as weaker cards when they were released, so that was kind of interesting. But then the playstyle changed when they just go Tin Can Turbo, just play with Call the Haunters, Oasis of Dragon Souls, let your opponent deal with your problems. And letting like a Tin Can live was like one of the worst things ever. And the deck actually changed quite a bit. There was different variants, like Artifact Cosmos, there's Demise Cosmos, like a lot of more cards came out, and the deck kept on evolving with the new sets, which made it last so much longer than I ever have anticipated. Another deck that gained quite a boost, Cyframes was actually pretty interesting, I would say. They came out last year, but this deck was like one of the counter decks. Not a lot of people like playing against it because it was a super reactive deck. It was You can consider it as anti-meta, for instance, but Psyframe Lord Omega was definitely one of the craziest boss monsters that everyone wanted because it was so generic. And although Psyframes definitely weren't the best at making Omega, they can definitely utilize like the strongest line of traps and that field spell that led you Synchro. Just made it very awkward to play against them because the only way to play against them is do very, very little and don't let them counter you, or else you're gonna start, facing punishment. Atlantean Mermails. This deck just won't die. It's lived forever, like from the Dragon Ruler era all the way till now, except that it kind of died off quite a bit because, well, the game and the meta state changed, where playing a 1-for-1 is not even good enough anymore, you could say. You needed to plus off of your opponent, but this deck didn't do that. Instead, it did something better. It decided to break boards. It was the deck that broke the board. And with the release of the Atlantean Prince, another Bosch release card. This card, we needed this way earlier, but this was insane because this was a 1-card combo. This card plus an instant fusion can easily guarantee over 10,000 damage. And that's why they came out with Norden with instant fusion and the Atlantean Dragoons being at 2. This deck just wrecked anyone. It always chose to go second, and as long as your opponent did not make a dweller on you first turn, you were good to go. You were going to wreck face, easily take that game. And with with a water kaiju specifically being one of the cards you can access, you can also act as a combo piece for tribute, like discard fodder for your Megalos and everything. The amount of damage, sheer damage that this deck can do, allowed it to be one of the best decks of 2016. Now 2016, talking about Bosch, it would not be proper if I did not talk about this deck, PePe. Whatever you want to call it. Was it Performage Pendulums, Performage Performapals, PePals? I have no idea. Like, many people came up with their own names because Lusters, they were the Pendulum series, everything just had Pendulums. Just call it PePe. Broken ass PePe. This is the one where you made the most broken boards and actually triggered Konami to make an emergency adjusted list for this particular deck. But at full power, I remember this deck. It was really, really dumb. Anytime, it almost felt luck-based because it always depended on who had more Wavering Eyes to play if you do have a mirror match. But this, if you actually combo off with the Sorcerer, well, you're off to a really good start. Setting up a Cyber Dragon Infinity or a Flesia and probably one more card. And you have your extra deck basically ready to kill your opponent. Common OTKs from this deck comes from like a Trapeze Magician and Ignister, and Ignister's still at 3 during this time, so yeah, you're gonna die really, really fast. This deck was insane. In 2 weeks, the emergency ban list came out, and, well, it's not an emergency ban list, for instance, but if you wanted to play in competitive events, you would have to play with 0 plush fire, 0 damage jugglers, and yeah, your opponent will basically playing against this deck, it just really sucked playing against this deck. But this deck would eventually evolve. Everyone thought that they would just die off, but this deck definitely fought for its money. Next up, during January, we did get a big release of Monarchs. Monarchs took the scene with the new structure deck, Monarchs 2.0, with 2 big Monarchs coming out, which was Aether and Erebus. And of course, the entire Monarch line of support, spells and traps all together. Really good stuff. This deck actually evolved from just being Domain Monarchs to Xyz Monarchs to whatever you want to call it. And then when the Super Quantum stuff came out and they just added in more and more diversity into this deck. Of course, this deck was super annoying because it didn't rely... Well, part of it relied on not having an extra deck, but Pantheism of the Monarch gave it so much consistency. Although people did complain about this deck bricking a lot, it is true, when you do brick with this deck, you're dead because there's no place to be made. But if you don't break with this deck, you can set up unbreakable boards, once again shutting off all your opponent's plays. It's all about not letting your opponent play in 2016 basically. And Aether let you tribute off your opponent's stuff if you use Monarch Stormforth, so you get to maximize Monarch Stormforth effect to its actual max potential. And a lot of decks just started to change up and then started going for more draw power with Kuras and everything, and just blew my mind of how far this deck went. And not only that, I believe Domain Monarchs did win Nats, so the gear goes to have it that these decks are very, very powerful, and the structure decks are getting stronger and stronger as we speak. Oh, another thing about Monarchs is during the release, we still had like Chicken Game and basically an FTK burn deck that held a really, really high consistency, which warranted it to be taken off in the ban list coming. But with Chicken Game and Upstart Goblins and all those good stuff, We move on to Super Quantums, another deck that did maximize on this, which was a turn 1 spit out one of the strongest monsters in the game, Magnus, which was basically immune to everything. Immune to everything, and you can just punch your opponent because it's really strong. Yeah, this is Super Quantums. I don't exactly have too much to talk about them because they were part of the Monarch engine as well. After the ban list, of course, we got DracoPals that evolved out of PePe, basically. All the stuff from the adjusted list did move forward, and then some. We lost Ignister. Ignister went down to 1, so we could not break Kozmo boards as easily. However, as an addition to the deck, we had to put Utopia into the deck because Utopia the Lightning came out around this time in North America. All you European friends here, yeah, we had a bit more luck with this deck than you guys did. But we also got the release of more and more cards, such as Performable Odd Eyes Unicorn, and we also have Light Phoenix. These cards made it so that we can play Sky Iris, so Magical Abductor definitely got added to the deck. So if you open with a Magical Abductor plus a Terraforming, you're basically good to go to set up your combo. And if you have an already Oddity to go with that, well, let's just say you're pretty much setting up the next Unbreakable board that was allowed, which was a bunch of stuff plus Negation, which is pretty common, really. Now, Burning Abyss and Phantom Knights. Now, this deck is actually Speedroids, Burning Abyss, and Phantom Knights because we use Speedroids Terratops plus Takatomborg to set up your very first Dante, which is pretty crazy because considering that Tour Guide was at 1 and we also gained Beatrice and all that good stuff. Like, Burning Abyss's inception started in Duelist Alliance, and that's a long time for a deck. This is the Shadal era's worth of deck, and this deck is still alive, kicking today. Definitely one of the more consistent decks, even with Beatrice at 1. As long as your Dante's at 3, nothing's gonna go wrong with you. And Terratop was a special summon, a free special summon on like the opening turn as long as you control no monster. So you basically get a free Dante without burning a normal summon. Pretty insane, and most of the not Burning Abyss, but the Phantom Knight stuff are also level 3, so you can overlay into Breaksword, go into more Dante, and you just gain a lot more utility with that searchable Fiendish Chain called the Fogblade. Fogblade also made it as a protective trap. It just blew my mind of how long this deck would last, and it just kept on going and going and going. And Farfa definitely made a bigger scene. Farfa definitely played at 3 during this time. Interrupting combos was more important than ever. Now, in Shining Victories, we gained Blue Eyes. Although Blue Eyes definitely weren't strong during this era, it took a bit of time before they can kick in. We needed the movie pack. The movie pack gave us the Blue Eyes alternative White Dragon, which made this whole thing viable. Now, there's a card that was released way back, not too far back, but like Melody of the Awakening Dragon, I should say. That card spiked up so much in price. It was a worthless $2 card. It was also on a YCS mat as well, but no one really kind of took notice to this card until they realized the alternative White Dragon was the reason why they kind of pre-planned it, and then basically that card spiked up. Luckily, we did get a re-release, a reprint in an Astral Pack, but not the same as a Super. This set released a bunch of new Blue Eye stuff from the new Monsters of Eyes of Blue, so the new support tuners, mainly the Sage and the Egg, the White Stone of Ancients, and the Synchro monster, Blue Eye Spirit Dragon. All in all, the biggest addition to this deck is that this deck was a powerhouse, pushed out so much threat, and well, your opponent just has to deal with it basically. However, it suffered the weakness that everything was a light monster and required special summon, so a lot of the Ally of Justice stuff just kicked in. Quarantine, you know, if you summon Quarantine, they're basically dead, and well, there's Blue Eyes for you. But Blue Eyes did make a huge impact, especially at Worlds. Worlds' most popular deck was Blue Eyes, and the final match between our North American runner-up and the champion were both mirroring Blue Eyes. Now, Shiranuis! Welcome, Shiranui. We have Shiranui Sage. Shiranui Sage, definitely one of the best cards that came out in the Dark Illusions, and this made Shiranuis playable, except that you don't really play Shiranuis, you're actually playing Uni-Zombie Synchro. So the Uni-Zombie Synchro deck was the Shiranui Omega deck. Really strong stuff. If you open the correct hand, you will rip out half of your opponent's hand right from the get-go. 3 cards out easily with the Omega. So Psyframe Lord Omega definitely was the star of this deck, for instance. It's just way too good, and because it was a generic Synchro 8, and with a lot of zombie stuff like Mizuki banishing itself out of the graveyard, you can recycle that effect pretty effectively with Cypher Lord Omega, and that's why this deck synergized so well. And noting the fact that Cypher Lord Omega had a 2800 stat line in attack, basically push pressure on your opponent constantly, and without them being able to effectively play their hand during their turn, you could set up easy kills with this deck. And this deck definitely performed very well and topped multiple events in a very short amount of time. Now another really annoying Synchro deck that also abused Omega, which is Dark Synchro. Dark Synchro, after the release of the Dark Illusions, definitely gained a lot of momentum. Thanks to Level Eater, it even warranted an OCG ban on Level Eater because this deck was super ridiculous. You cannot max C this deck, for instance, because if you max C in the wrong timing, you will deck out. They will deck you up. They have enough to special summon 30 something times and burn out most of their own extra deck too, for that matter. This deck was a really strong deck, especially going first. However, it does get shut down quite hard if you counter properly. This deck is super special summon dependent, but if it does combo off properly, you will be losing about 4 cards in your hand and getting trished in between. So very unfortunate. To most people, this deck almost felt like solitaire because they're just doing their combo non-stop. As long as they don't screw up and you can't interrupt them, they can't lose. So Dark Synchro is definitely one of the scariest decks of the time. Really hated facing against it. I remember facing Calvin and then just started doing loops on my hand without me getting a single turn. That was very painful, but that's where hand traps needed to come in, and well, after siding it's not as bad, but you really don't want them going first. Also released in the Dark Illusions, we have Metalfoes. Metalfoes, starting off with how they played, it's pretty interesting. The original Metalfoe deck, I personally felt that didn't have very much impact because it was seen as more of an engine than an actual deck. However, like what kind of sucked about them is that they relied on the other archetypes to do well. Like they needed Gofu to go in synchros, they needed to go into Ultimate Zolkin as one of the win conditions, they needed the Majespecter Kirin, which they still use because Majespecter Kirin is obviously way too good of a card. Luckily it's at 1 now, but even then it was like ridiculously strong. If it was at 3, I would hate to face this deck, and they had some pretty sick combos with them Kaiju looping with the Kirin, but this was not new stuff. It just relied on a lot of old combos. Now with release of Invasion Vengeance, the deck actually became much more solid, much more playable, and much more versatile in terms of what it can do, and is not overly dependent on like other kinds of combos, other lines of plays, because now you can actually play with your own cards. Mithrilium and Full Metal Alchemist definitely added some solid counterplays against your opponent. So now you actually have a beat stick that you can use, which is Mithrilium, and it can spin a card back on the field to the hand. With Alchemist, it can interrupt combos that rely on monsters. So all in all, the additions to this deck definitely helped out quite a bit. Barrier Statues. Let's not forget about Barrier Statues. So we did have some anti-meta in the format, which is Barrier Statues. I personally really just hated Barrier Statue decks because it was a reminder of that. If you guys remember that No Fun Zone deck I made a while back during the Necros format, which was pretty hard to play against anti-meta during the Necros format since they had so much versatility and outing basically every single situation. This was kind of like that, except that Barrier Statue with like a Moon Mirror Shield just basically limited all your special summons, so you're super limited on your plays. And if your opponent went first and they played Demise and everything like that, a card of Demise, they gained so much like protection with the back row that you can't play your deck, especially for decks that relied on the extra deck for outs for everything. You're gonna die super fast. And it was like Vanity's Fiend attacking over your monster just because none of your monsters can combo off anymore. So Barrier Statue is definitely one of the scary anti-meta decks of the 2016. So back to Majespecters, with Tides of the Brethren coming out, Tides of the Brethren being able to special summon more and more dudes. This made Majespecters have a comeback near the end of the year. I thought it was actually pretty smart of them to actually use this card, using it to gain like what, a +5, I believe. You can get a +5 with this card just because of your Fox, you summon out your Toad and your Crow, and then you get more cards. Each summon that you get out is a +1 at least, 1 for 1 from the card itself, and then the 2 monsters and then the 2 searches. Basically set up your entire back row so that your opponent struggles to deal with your back row. With a Cyclone, a Tornado, and maybe a Tempest, you had everything to out monsters. And with the Kaiba structure deck and the Yugi structure deck coming out, we have to talk about ABCs. ABC dominated the format pre-Invasion Vengeance. Definitely one of the strongest decks of the format. Ridiculously strong because of the combos and the simplicity of the deck. It is a structure deck based deck, so you can expect that most structured decks now are ridiculously strong. And this deck was definitely one of the craziest. You only needed the ASL Core, B Buster Drake, and C Crush Wyvern, and the ABC's Union Hanger. These cards were the center combo piece of the entire deck and basically made a light machine deck viable. Well, this deck had, well, the main thing is the Union Hanger allowed us to set up the ABC Dragon so quickly, and then ABC Dragon Buster as a card itself, if you read all the effects, you can say that it is pretty ridiculous, especially on how easy it is to summon. So the trade-off of risk and reward was very low. However, the deck did suffer for having its combos simplicity, and it's very easy to interrupt as long as you know what you're doing. And incoming some totally awesome stuff, we have totally awesome Paleozoics, although Paleozoics did perform pretty well, but I'm going to throw in the totally awesome in there just because totally awesome added another level of annoyance to this deck. This is the trap-based deck, so very different from what we've seen so far, because most of the decks that we have been talking about in 2016 were very monster-centric, like Kozmos and like ABCs. Metalfoes. Most of it was very monster-centric, didn't have like the back row to control, but this deck proved to be very different angle for sure, with Paleozoic, Anomalocaris, and Opabinia. These cards, and like Canadia, Hallucigenia, Deinonychus, and Olinodes, all these guys made it so that, you know, it gave tribute to all the old cards we used to play, like MST, Book of Moon, Karma Cut. They had all these effects, and then they also acted as monsters. And what was really crazy about this deck is most of these monsters, they're immune to monster effects. They're just played out straight up immune, so it was harder for most decks to deal with without like spells and traps to do monster removal. Well, I guess Majespecter had that easy because Majespecters can affect these monsters, and whenever they die, they get banished. But if they do go into Anomalocaris or they go into Totally Awesome, you're just basically facing one of the worst threats ever. And Totally Awesome, oh my god, this card is one of the bane. It is the new Cyber Dragon Infinity, basically. It's like they negate anything except that it steals it. After it negates it, sets it back on your side, if it's a legal target, of course. Well, this deck won MOS4, our most recent thing. You can check out the deck profile in one of our video lists, but this deck definitely a very scary deck, and Totally Awesome is going to be splashed everywhere that can run Water Monster. And speaking of which, we have Totally Awesome heroes. We have, what, making a Darklaw plus this, and then your opponent basically struggles to play anything. The thing is, like, Totally Awesome can steal the card wherever it lands, as long as it destroys it. So even if it gets banished, put to the extra deck, you name it, as long as it can take it, it will take it. And Darklaw made it even harder because you can't search your outs anymore. And, well, with the negation, it's made it very difficult to really push anything forward. Like, the only way I would know how to get out of this as an ABC player, special a Thrasher, normal something, and hope that he doesn't have a trap to kill you so that you can overlay into like a lightning and ram them over or something like that. And finally, to end off the year, we're going to talk about Darklords. Darklords was released, I guess, pretty recently in one of the latest subsets, and Darklords already making an impact, topping YCS, topping regionals very quickly. Of course, I'm not too familiar with the deck, but I do know that this deck, thanks to Allure of Darkness being at 3 and having a solid draw engine, solid search engine, and solid special summoning engine, you got one of the best decks ever because they have a very high stat line. So kind of like Blue Eyes, it's like playing against a Blue Eyes deck because the stat line's so high, so you're always under threat whenever they're out. But they have the ability to steal your monster with their traps, and all the Darklords, except like all the new Darklords, not like Superbia or like Darklord Zerato, like all the new Darklords, they are able to activate graveyard spells and traps. So any card that you use once, you can use twice or 3 times almost by shuffling it back in, so your deck never really runs out, and the amount of contingency and the amount of recovery that this deck has is pretty insane. And they of course have their own monster reborn to revive Darklords out of the graveyard. So this deck really scary. As Superbia, also like another big monster. Just blows my mind to see how they revitalize some of the older archetypes that didn't really see much play, but now we are seeing it happen. I'm really glad to see Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of go in that direction. But that's it for my 2016 top tier timeline. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If I missed any decks, please leave it down in the comment section below. I would like to hear your thoughts on what are some more powerful decks of 2016, or what are some of the decks that you would like to see on this list. So until next time, if you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more from MST.TV and if you want to see more stuff from MST.TV in 2017, hit the like button and subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time. Until next time, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.